When I teach my world history class, I find that simulation makes the topics more relatable and sensible for my students. While there are a plethora of digital and paper simulations that I can use, there are also many board games and card games that do a phenomenal job representing the subject matter that I teach in my class. This is the third video in my Games I Would Use to Teach If Money Were No Object series. And this week, we will discuss world history. If you are interested in seeing games that would work well for teaching history to the younger game players, check out the post by Sensible Homeschool that is linked in the description of this video. Let's get started. Before we dig in too deep, there are numerous war games that are set in historical time periods that would fit well in a history course. As I thought about adding variety to the mix of the types of games I would use, I considered many games that would be considered war games, and that I might try if the time in my class allowed for it, but I would be careful not to get too deep into this genre if my students did not embrace it. You'll notice a few games popping up on the screen that are games that I considered, but ultimately decided not to go with. They're great games, but if I use them all, it'd be too much on the war front. The first game that I would use would be a sweeping overview of world history. This genre has been used many times in both computer games as well as board games, most notably by Sid Meier's Civilization, but I would use the card game Through the Ages Civilization. The board game version of Sid Meier's Civilization would also be a possibility of a game that allows students to get an expanded scope, bird's eye view of world history, but it is a much longer game. Through the Ages is a card drafting game where players develop their culture, science, resources, and population through the use of cards to get victory points needed to win. Famous historical leaders are used in the game, and buildings are built and militaries are developed to aid in the achievement of a player's goals. While this game is not focused on one particular era of human history, it is a good bird's eye view of human history and can be used to show the development of government, technology, and civilization. The game would be a good introduction for a world history course, or it would be a good game to play at the end of the course to reflect on all the people, places, and events that transpired along the way. Sekigahara, the Unification of Japan, is a two-player game set in the 1600s in Japan. In this game, the challenging dynamics of feudal Japan are represented by the fact that each player competing for the leadership of the country cannot rely on the daimyos, the local lords, to support them in battle. Additionally, these daimyos may take their armies and defect to the other side. This creates a completely different dynamic than the traditional war board game, and highlights how powerful these local lords actually were in Japanese society. This would help our discussion as we discuss how Japanese society evolved over time in the 1600s. Newton highlights the scientific revolution and the Age of Enlightenment time period. Players take on the role of a young scientist, studying and trying to create new inventions. Players need to balance travel, work, and experiments while they collect cards that will allow them to make all these moves. The game is played over the course of 6 rounds, with 5 cards being played in each round. Players first play a card from their hand, unlocking actions that they can complete, and then play out for the remainder of their turn. The game can be played solo and with up to 4 players. Access to this game is easier than the other options because it can be played digitally on the Yukata platform for free, without creating an account. While this game is not as steeped in history as the other games on this list, the themes of study and experimentation of the scientific revolution are present, creating a link to the time period. Brass Birmingham immerses players in the industrial era England, requiring them to take on the role of entrepreneurs that are building their business empires. The game highlights the role of shipping by boat in the early industrial era and the transformation that came with the railroad. Players need to factor in the market demands for their goods and efficiently build their network to maximize their point output in the game. This game would be a good introduction to the industrial era for students as they try to embrace the winning approach to their businesses, and we could compare their experiences with the historical changes in the industrial era while seeing the side effects for workers and communities. The French Revolution is a time period that gets a lot of focus and study from historians and board game designers alike. Command & Colors and Field Commander Napoleonics are a couple of games that could be used to go through the conflict of the time period, but I would focus on a couple of games for this time, Liberte and the Congress of Vienna. Liberte goes through the major events of the French Revolution and could be used to coincide with a unit on the revolution. It has elements of politics, including elections, as well as elements of fighting on the board. This mirrors the complex elements present throughout the revolution. The game ends with the takeover of the French government by Napoleon. That paves the way for Congress of Vienna, a game for 4 players that goes through the conflict between Napoleon and the European powers. Instead of being a traditional war game, this game requires political discussion and debate to drive political decisions. While 3 of the 4 players are on the same side, they have differing priorities, and at the end of the game, there will only be one winner, so each of the European powers opposing Napoleon will need to focus on their priorities as they work to defeat Napoleon. While a Napoleonic victory will change the course of history, students can also use the circumstances around the defeat of Napoleon to discuss the Congress of Vienna, where an agreement for a post-Napoleon peace in Europe was brokered by Austria. So there are many games about World War I and World War II, as well as the Cold War, that would be appropriate here. I would invite you to check out my videos about U.S. history to see some of the Axis and Allies games and other games that I suggested would be used in that course that would also be appropriate here. I'll have links to those videos on play cards and in the description. The last game I would use for a world history course would be Ghandi, the Decolonization of India. The British Empire withdrew from India after World War II, starting large-scale decolonization of European powers throughout the world over the course of decades. Ghandi, Decolonization of India, attempts to show the process of the revolution by Indians against the rule of the British Empire. This game includes complex dynamics as there are 4 separate factions that can sometimes work together, but have their own goals and scoring systems to try to win their game. This includes revolutionaries who are willing to use violence to achieve their goals, as well as Gandhi's non-violent methods. The results of the game could be that India stays under the control of the British Empire, India gains independence as a unified nation, or a historically accurate result that India gains independence but is split into the nations of India and Pakistan. This game can set up discussions on many 20th century topics: Gandhi and nonviolent protest, the complex dynamics of societies where the political goals of different groups do not align, decolonization around the world, the partition of India and Pakistan. These are just a few of the discussions that can be had after playing this game. I hope that this look at world history has been beneficial to you. I'd love to hear of other games that I should consider for teaching world history in the future, as I know that there are lots of games that would really fit well into this genre. Drop a comment that has your favorites. If you're interested in seeing more games about board games in the classroom, or board games in general, hit the like and subscribe buttons, and I'll see you soon.